Well, hello MPD family. This is scheduled for airing beginning with early car briefings on Monday, October 3rd at 5:45 a.m. or roughly thereabouts. This is for most today, specifically to the commission personnel, taking nothing away from the non-sworn, but we like to keep you in the loop so you know that when we're doing some operational departures that you know where we're coming from and why. So all are welcome to listen, but this is going to be a more target-specific operational note, so I'm just setting the table for your expectations on this. This summer, we encountered as a nation a number of instances where officers were literally ambushed and assassinated. We saw the 5 officers who lost their lives in Dallas. We saw 3 more in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And as a course of all those discussions, both internally and from looking at external sources, this department, like many others, was engaged in the discussion of whether we should go to 2-officer cars or 1-officer cars, and what other types of mechanisms can we do to keep our officers in our community safe. I even went to the OAC, I went to the management team, and I said if there was a clear and prevalent theme coming out of there, I was open and receptive to seeing how we could adopt and adapt to meeting those needs of our officers and keeping them safe. And quite frankly, there wasn't one clear sign of unanimity coming out of that. So much so that operationally the captains were told to go back to your districts and see if you can carve an individualized response. Perhaps some officers wanted to go with 2 officers and others preferred not, and see if we could make some modifications to embrace both and accommodate both those needs. So there wasn't one clear, resounding, resonating signal coming out of there. And yet I'm still concerned because I've had officers who have come to me and said, even though we may not publicly be comfortable saying we want 2-officer squads, we'd kind of like it if we could have 2-officer squads. What could you do for us in that, Chief? And again, I have some officers who have scrupulously maintained that they like their independence, they like their autonomy, that's their office, that's their home, that's their working environment. They don't want anybody sharing that car. So as a result, owing to that and some other considerations that frankly are related to our efforts to continue to move towards de-escalation techniques, I'm improvised an SOP change in how we respond to our calls for service. And effective Monday, after the first briefing and over the course of time, what we're going to do is everybody's going to get an SOP, and it'll say effective immediately, basically, officers shall not disregard backup. So if it's a priority call or a call that we've typically heard, collaborated on because we've had some input in our selection of calls with dispatch, if those calls are 2-officer calls, you may not, as an officer, you no longer have the discretion to say, call that other officers off. I can handle this. You probably can, and in 9 times out of 10, it was probably more efficient. I'm not denying that. I'm not begrudging you. I know that our officers have an exceptional work ethic here at MPD, and I know we're very conscientious about beat integrity and servicing our calls and getting calls out of the queue as best we can, because that's who we are. And we're proud to own that work product. And I'm glad for that. But I'm not going to compromise officer and community safety for an efficiency business model. And if it means then that we take more calls in the queue, so be it. I've talked to dispatch. They're prepared for that. And we're going to deal with it as best we can. And ultimately it will come down to me and those policymakers or politicians or community constituents who are unhappy that our response times in their way are lagging, or that some of these calls aren't being handled, if at all. That will ultimately come back to me as well. Because I need to have an adult conversation with policymakers and those in this community who on the one hand want expediency, want business, want efficiency, but quite frankly, that's dwarfed in comparison to the fact that our constituents want our officers and members of our community to be safe, or safer as the case may be. So as a result, if you're called and it's a 2-officer call, you may not disregard that backup. And in fact, you should stage and approach the subjects together. The only time you can get out of that is obviously if we have exigent circumstances. That legal doctrine will always supersede or trump any policy or procedure or protocol when we have articulable facts that discern that someone is in imminent peril of bodily harm. We're going to forgo that protocol. That's exigent circumstances in a nutshell, and nothing's going to deter or change that. Similarly, supervisors who have a bigger, broad view of the context of what's going on in this city may, if appropriate, also waive that necessity. Although I hope those instances are fewer and farther between, because it basically will work to be disingenuous if we don't make a full-throated effort to see that this outcome is what I'm hoping for. Yes, the response times will be more delayed. Yes, more calls will be stacking up. But at what expense? I'm willing to offer that officer safety and community safety is far, far more precious to me than those other expediency factors. And I hope you would come to see and understand that. So much has happened over the last 3 years. Anything and everything that could be calamitous has happened, especially during my tenure of office. And the one thing, God forbid, is that I don't want to have to pay a visit to anybody's family or friends and visit them with dire news of someone being hurt or worse. So I think it's time that since I haven't been able to coax, persuade, coerce, or co-opt anyone, I'm going to have to do one of these things top down, and this is this encyclical that I'm prepared to go with on Monday. If in fact it becomes manifestly clear that there are unintended consequences that I didn't perceive, then of course we will make adaptations, we will change them, we will roll with those, and we will incorporate those as best we can. But I must pronounce an emphatic underscore to the fact that we need to work with our backup, and that's a good thing. That does not say anything at all deleterious about your personal work ethic, your ownership of your beat integrity, and your pride in servicing as many calls as you can. We'll service the calls, the priority calls, those calls that are compelling, but we're going to do it more safely, and in that sense I'm convinced that we're going to come to better outcomes. I'm also going to be at the next 22 in-services to address this and any other nuanced issues as we move into more de-escalation topics. So don't disappoint. I'm sure you will tell me all of your concerns. Just try to be a little respectful about it when you do. Thank you. Be safe, and we'll talk later.